My girlfriend faked her own death for an insurance payout, and now, 5 years later, she's back to steal my billion-dollar tech company. But the secrets she's hiding are far more dangerous than fraud. The smell of stale coffee and desperation was the cologne of my early 20s. I was running on fumes, fueled by ramen noodles and the wild, improbable dream that my coding skills could somehow translate into a profitable business. Ether Dynamics. That's what I'd named the AI scheduling platform. It sounded grand, important, something that might actually work. For 2 years, it hadn't. My office was a glorified closet in a shared workspace, the rent eating us alive, and my only investor was the small inheritance my grandmother left me. Then there was Clara. Clara wasn't just my girlfriend. She was my anchor, my muse, the only person who looked at my bleary-eyed, feverish coding sessions and saw a future millionaire instead of a lunatic hoarding energy drink cans. She was vibrant, brilliant in her own right, a rising star in corporate risk assessment. She understood liability, futures, and crucially, she understood me. Our life together, though modest, was built on complete trust. We shared a joint savings account, a tiny apartment with perpetually leaky plumbing, and a terrifying mortgage on that dream. We often joked morbidly about what would happen if I finally crashed and burned. "If ether dies, babe," she'd say, tracing the lines on my palm while I debugged a segmentation fault at 3 a.m., "we'll start over. We have each other. That's the real venture capital." It was sweet, but the reality was the bank wouldn't care about our love story when the loan payment was due. That's where the insurance policy came in. It wasn't my idea. It was Clara's, presented 6 months before Ether started showing promise. She had been quietly researching whole life policies, specifically ones with high, immediate payouts in case of accidental death, naming me the sole beneficiary. She framed it as a necessary evil, a catastrophic safety net. "If you get hit by a bus tomorrow, Alex, I lose the apartment, I lose my future, and I lose you. This policy locks in value just in case the worst happens before we secure funding," I argued, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. It felt like planning for divorce before the wedding, but she was so logical, so persuasive. She pointed out the increasing debt, the sheer impossibility of launching without more capital, and how this safety net could secure us even if Ether failed. We eventually signed the paperwork. It was a huge premium, but she handled all the financial maneuvering. She even arranged for a small secondary policy on herself, naming me the beneficiary, citing the risks of the city and her long commutes. I hated it, but I trusted her instincts implicitly. She was always 10 steps ahead. The turning point for Ether came abruptly. A major logistics firm saw a beta test, and the next thing I knew, venture capitalists were swarming my tiny office, offering valuations that made my head spin. Within 18 months, we were on the map. We moved out of the closet and into a sleek, glass-walled HQ downtown. The debt vanished. Millions piled into my personal accounts. And then, Clara disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. It was meticulous. She went out for coffee one Tuesday morning, left her phone charging on the kitchen counter, a deliberate omission, considering how attached she always was to it, and never came back. The police investigation was swift and agonizing. Her car was found parked neatly near a coastal trailhead, miles from the city. Her wallet and ID were inside. No forced entry, no struggle. Just gone. It looked like a walk-off, a sudden devastating suicide, perhaps spurred by the pressures of her own high-stress job, or maybe something darker we never knew about. The insurance company investigated, but the evidence was frustratingly thin. No note, just the abandoned car and the digital silence. They paid out after 6 agonizing months. The payout on her policy was significant, enough to secure my future tenfold, even if Ether went under tomorrow. I felt sick receiving the check, a horrible, guilt-ridden windfall. I used a portion of it to pay off the mortgage on the apartment we shared, a monument to a life that was suddenly severed. I poured the rest back into Ether, refusing to touch it personally. I didn't want her memory tainted by that tainted money. For 5 years, I mourned. I threw myself into work until I couldn't feel anything else. Clara was a ghost in the machine, a beautiful, tragic footnote to my success. Then Ether hit the big leagues. We secured that massive government contract, the one that put us in the rarefied air of tech giants. The IPO was scheduled for 3 months out, and I was on the cover of Forbes. I was officially a success story, albeit one built on the foundation of profound loss. I was celebrating, a quiet, lonely dinner with my CTO, when my phone buzzed with an encrypted message. It was a single compressed video file, untraceable. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sound loud enough to drown out the clinking of expensive glassware around me. I excused myself and retreated to the men's room, locking myself in a stall. I pressed play. The video was clearly taken by a hidden camera, low quality, shaky, set up in what looked like a high-end penthouse apartment overlooking a harbor I didn't recognize. On screen, a woman was laughing, a familiar, bright, infectious sound. She was wearing a silk robe, her dark hair tied up carelessly. She looked older, perhaps a little weary around the eyes, but unmistakably, impossibly Clara. She was holding a champagne flute, turning to speak to someone just out of frame. "Honestly, Darren," she purred, taking a slow sip. "The first year was tedious, but that payout was just the catalyst we needed." He believed it. He always believed in the narrative I built for him. My breath hitched, lodging painfully in my throat. Darren? Catalyst? I stared, unable to move, the fluorescent bathroom light suddenly blinding. Then, a man's voice, deep and smooth, responded from just beyond the edge of the lens. "He's done well, hasn't he? That little scheduling app made him untouchable. Now, what's the plan for the IPO window? Are we ready to move Phase 2 into effect, or should we let the poor sap bask a little longer?" Clara smiled, a cold, predatory smile I had never seen directed at me. She leaned into the camera's implied focus, her eyes glittering with calculation. "Phase 2 is ready," she said, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "It's time Alex knew his wife didn't die by misadventure. It's time he knew I'm back for my share, and I'm not coming back for a divorce settlement." The video cut out, leaving me staring at a blank screen that reflected my own horrified face. My meticulously controlled world tilted violently on its axis. Faked death, insurance fraud, 5 years of genuine, gut-wrenching grief, built on a foundation of elaborate deception orchestrated by the person I trusted most in the universe. Phase 2. The word echoed in the sterile silence of the bathroom stall. What did that even mean? I had secured the IPO. I was about to be worth billions. If she faked her death to secure the insurance payout, which I was the beneficiary of, then she had effectively stolen that money, laundering it through my tragedy. But if she was back now for the IPO... I stumbled out of the stall, leaning against the cold tile wall, trying to force air into lungs that suddenly felt too small for my chest. My CTO, Mark, was waiting by the door, looking concerned. "Alex, you all right, man? You look like you just saw a ghost." A ghost? Oh, Mark, if only you knew the specific shade of my newly resurrected phantom. "Fine," I managed, my voice a raw rasp. "Sudden migraine. I need to go home. Cancel the rest of the evening. I practically sprinted from the restaurant, dismissing my driver and hailing a cab downtown. Every passing siren sounded like a police car closing in on my lie. Our lie. When I got back to my penthouse, the silence was deafening. This place, built on Clara's manufactured demise, now felt like a gilded cage designed for my public execution. I paced the floor, reviewing the video clip on my encrypted burner phone, analyzing every pixel. The harbor view. It was Monaco, I realized with a sickening jolt. Not just rich, but untouchable. And Darren? Who was Darren? I had to know if she was still in the city or if this was just a cruel taunt from overseas. My resources, the immense, discrete network I'd built through ether dynamics, were suddenly pointed inward, weaponized against my own history. I instructed my security team through a heavily obfuscated channel to pull all high-end property acquisitions in the tri-state area, flagged with shell corporations matching any known associates of Clara's former employer, Risk Assessment Group, going back 7 years. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack of corporate finance, but it was all I had. While waiting for the results, I decided I couldn't just sit here paralyzed. I needed evidence, context. The one place Clara always kept secrets, even before she disappeared, was her private office at the old firm, the one she supposedly left before her suicide. I still had access codes, dormant but hopefully functional. It took less than an hour to drive across town. The building was still there, sterile and imposing. I bypassed the main lobby security with a level of access that made me feel both powerful and deeply compromised. I reached her old suite on the 30th floor. The door clicked open silently. Her office was exactly as she left it. A few framed photos, a stack of neatly organized quarterly reports. I went straight for the heavy mahogany desk, running my fingers over the smooth wood. I knew her hiding spots. We shared too many late nights sharing secrets, even if some of those secrets were bigger than I could ever imagine. Under the false bottom of the center drawer, beneath where she kept her specialized encryption keys, I found it. A physical ledger, bound in deep crimson leather. It wasn't digital. It was old school, handwritten. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped it. The first few pages were routine financial records, but they quickly descended into something incomprehensible, a web of dates, code names, and astronomical figures. It wasn't just about the insurance policy. This ledger detailed a massive, multi-jurisdictional money laundering operation tied into global black markets. The insurance payout was just one small transaction in a vast, ongoing scheme. And there, near the bottom of the most recent page, was the entry dated just 3 days ago. Alex payout secured. Phase 2 commencement October 14th. Target liquidity event IPO. Below that, scribbled almost as an afterthought, was a name I recognized instantly from the small text in the video. D. Sinclair, co-signer/exit strategy. Suddenly, the heavy office door behind me hissed open. I spun around, clutching the ledger to my chest, my heart vaulting into my throat. Standing in the doorway wasn't a security guard or a cleaning crew or even Darren Sinclair. It was a man I hadn't seen in 10 years, my first disastrous venture partner from a failed app concept in college. He was wearing a dark suit, his expression flat and utterly devoid of warmth. "Hello, Alex," he said quietly, stepping fully into the room and blocking the exit. "Clara sends her regards. She said you might get sentimental and go looking for old files. She also said to tell you that she wrote the core algorithm for Ether, not you. You just assembled the parts she gave you." The man in the doorway, Mark, my CTO, wasn't supposed to be here. Mark, who toasted my success with me just hours ago. Mark, whose concern had seemed so genuine when I rushed out of the restaurant. The revelation about Clara's intellectual property theft was a secondary detonation. The primary shockwave was staring at my supposed confidant, now standing guard over my fragile reality. "Mark, what in God's name are you talking about?" I managed, clutching the crimson ledger like a shield. The sheer audacity of it. The double betrayal. Clara wasn't just a con artist, she was a mastermind who had partnered with my closest professional ally to systematically strip me of everything, starting with my identity. Mark didn't flinch. He slowly pulled a small, matte black object from his inner jacket pocket. It wasn't a phone. It was too sleek, too utilitarian. A proximity fob, perhaps, or something far worse. I'm talking about the truth, Alex. The version Clara wanted you to live in was comfortable, the lonely genius built on tragedy. But the real ether? That took two minds working perfectly in sync. Clara created the foundational predictive logic loop. I handled the infrastructure, the optimization, the selling of it. You were the perfect fall guy, the emotionally invested creator, the face of the brand. The insurance payout was just severance for your role in building the platform. He took a slow step toward me, his eyes cold, devoid of the camaraderie we'd shared over endless debugging sessions. And D. Sinclair? That's Daniel Sinclair. He's the one who handled the international shell acquisitions necessary to fence the IP before the IPO locks everything down. You were supposed to disappear quietly after the payout, Alex. A tragic overdose, maybe. You went off script by becoming too successful too fast. My mind raced, frantically trying to fit these new, horrifying pieces into the puzzle. The late nights, the shared secrets, the trust I placed in Mark regarding every single line of code, all of it a lie. He hadn't been helping me. He had been monitoring me, waiting for the opportune moment to seize control. Why now? I choked out. Why wait until the IPO is 3 months out? You could have taken the code any time. Mark smiled, a thin, unpleasant stretching of his lips. Because we needed the valuation to be maximum. Clara knew your drive. She knew you wouldn't stop until Ether was worth $10 billion. We needed the market cap to inflate organically, driven by your genuine, brilliant coding on top of her initial architecture. We were waiting for the ceiling to crack open. Now that it has, it's time to enact Phase 2, asset reallocation. He gestured vaguely with the black fob. Clara is handling the transfer of the primary server farm overseas this week. Once the IPO files are submitted, we execute a final code swap, injecting a backdoor Trojan that transfers primary ownership rights and all liquid assets into the Sinclair/Clara Trust. You'll be left holding a shell corporation, legally bankrupt, facing SEC investigation for massive insider trading due to unauthorized asset movement. The irony was a physical punch. I was about to be ruined by the very success I bled for. "You think you can just walk out of here with the ledger?" Mark asked, his tone hardening. "That ledger details your complicity in the fraud. Even if you didn't know the scope, it implicates you in the insurance scheme." "I'm not going anywhere," I spat, adrenaline finally surging past the terror. I looked past Mark toward the huge, floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city lights, a view Clara supposedly paid for with her life. I remembered something Clara always said about risk assessment: never rely on a single exit. She taught me that security wasn't about locking doors. It was about having redundant, untraceable escape routes. I slammed the crimson ledger down onto the desk, not caring about the noise, and dove sideways toward the nearby server rack, a relic from my early days, left plugged in behind a decorative screen in this office, running diagnostic backups. It was archaic, analog, and crucially, not connected to the main Ether network, which Mark would have certainly compromised. Mark reacted instantly, lunging forward with surprising speed. He wasn't just a programmer, he was clearly muscle, or had hired help nearby. I barely managed to hit the emergency power sequence on the rack just as his hands clamped onto my shoulder, spinning me around. "Stupid move, Alex!" he snarled, shoving me against the desk. The black fob was raised now, not as a key, but as a weapon. A heavy stunner, perhaps. But the power sequence wasn't the real goal. As the rack's internal cooling fans roared to life in protest, spitting out a cloud of dust and static, I heard a faint click from the ceiling directly above us. It was the silent alarm I'd installed secretly 5 years ago, a dedicated, hardwired panic button linked directly to a non-government, private security firm based in Switzerland, a contingency plan I'd named Contingency Alpha after Clara disappeared. It was a line of communication only I knew about, buried deep in the building's HVAC schematics, triggered by a specific frequency burst from the overheating server rack. Mark frowned, hearing the unfamiliar sound above the fans. "What was that?" Before he could react further, the office lights flickered violently, then plunged into absolute darkness. The emergency backup lights failed to kick on. The entire floor had gone dead, not just the power grid, but the internal security monitoring, too. In the sudden, thick blackness, I heard Mark curse loudly. Then the sound of glass shattering as he swung wildly, hitting the desk where I'd been standing a second before. I was already moving, rolling beneath the desk and scrambling toward the heavy oak door, clutching the only real piece of evidence, the faint memory of the exact latitude and longitude of the Monaco harbor view from Clara's whispered conversation. I burst out of the office, slamming the door shut behind me, plunging Mark back into the silent chaos. I didn't stop to lock it. I sprinted down the corridor toward the executive elevator, fumbling for my phone. I had to get out of the building before reinforcements arrived, and I had to reach the only person I could think of who operated completely outside the grid of corporate oversight or insurance claims. A semi-retired, deeply paranoid former government cryptographer who owed me a huge favor. I jabbed the emergency call button for the elevator, hearing muffled shouts erupting from Clara's office behind me. The elevator doors finally slid open with a grating screech, revealing not an empty car, but 2 men in dark tactical gear standing stiffly inside, their faces obscured by shadows and visors. They weren't Mark's security detail. They looked professional, lethal, and definitely not expecting me. One of the figures raised a silence weapon directly at my chest, and I realized, with a sickening lurch, that Mark hadn't just been covering his tracks. He had activated a containment protocol, and this elevator wasn't an escape route. It was the trap. The silence of the 2 figures in the elevator was heavier than any noise. They moved with the coordinated lethality of a SWAT team, but their uniforms bore no insignia. These weren't private security. These were ghosts, the kind of operatives you paid enormous sums to make problems, and people vanish. Mark hadn't just betrayed me. He had called in the cleanup crew before I even had a chance to use my Swiss lifeline. I froze on the threshold, the polished steel of the elevator doors reflecting the faint, emergency hallway lighting, making the silhouettes of the 2 men seem even more menacing. My heart hammered a desperate rhythm against my ribs. I was trapped between the darkness of Clara's betrayal and the immediate physical threat in front of me. My training, the frantic, desperate coding sessions where I learned to think 3 steps ahead of systemic failure, kicked in. Fight or flight was too binary. This required exploitation of known vulnerabilities. I didn't try to run back toward Mark. He would have alerted everyone by now. I didn't try to reason with the men in tactical gear. They weren't paid to listen. Instead, I slammed my open palm against the illuminated door close button, repeatedly. Not to close the doors, but to jam the mechanism momentarily. As the men hesitated, momentarily thrown by the unexpected frantic input, I dropped my shoulder and hurled myself sideways, back into the hallway, away from the elevator shaft. The move was clumsy, fueled by pure panic, but it bought me a crucial second. A burst of suppressed gunfire erupted from the elevator car. The sound was muffled, a heavy thump, 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 but the rounds chewed into the marble wall where my head had been moments before, spitting expensive dust into the air. "Elevator override engaged," one of the men barked, his voice distorted through his helmet speaker. "Subject is mobile. Containment zone initiated." Containment zone. They weren't trying to arrest me. They were trying to neutralize the leak. The ledger was still clutched in my hand. I sprinted toward the nearest emergency stairwell, ignoring the protests of my lungs. I hit the fire door and threw myself down the concrete steps, taking 3 at a time. The building management would eventually register the gunfire, but I needed to buy time for my Swiss contact to even pick up the phone. As I descended, 20 flights, then 30, the sounds from above became clearer. The specialized team wasn't following me conventionally. They were using the service shafts and internal maintenance paths, moving with unnerving speed. I could hear the faint thud of specialized boots impacting the metal treads several floors above me. When I finally reached the ground floor lobby, the transition from the sterile, dark corridor to the opulent, brightly lit main entrance was jarring. The lobby was deserted. Mark had cleared it out, or perhaps the containment protocol involved locking down the public access points. The heavy glass revolving doors were sealed tight, reinforced steel panels sliding silently into place across the openings. I slammed against the glass, futilely, looking for any emergency release. Nothing. I was sealed inside my own corporate monument. I turned back toward the stairwell entrance. Too late. The 2 tactical figures were standing at the top of the stairwell opening, blocking my ascent. And now a 3rd figure emerged, walking slowly down the steps. This one wasn't in tactical gear. He was wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my first car, and in his hand he held a long, slender cane with a silver wolf's head pommel. It was Daniel Sinclair, D. Sinclair, the co-signer, the exit strategy. He stopped halfway down the stairs, regarding me with an expression of bored condescension. "Messy, Alex, truly messy. You should have taken the buyout when it was offered quietly. Clara warned me you were emotionally volatile when cornered." He tapped the silver wolf's head on the marble floor. "I'm not here to discuss the algorithms, Alex. I'm here for the collateral." He nodded toward my hand. "Hand over the ledger." My phone buzzed. A single incoming call from an unknown international number, my Swiss contact. He had answered. I looked from the phone in my left hand to the heavily armed men blocking my retreat, and to Daniel Sinclair descending toward me with glacial calm. If I answered the phone, I'd have to distract them, potentially giving Sinclair the opening he needed to close the distance. If I ignored it, I lost my last, slim chance at external help. I took a deep breath, ignoring the mounting pressure in my chest. I flipped the phone open, putting it on speaker just as Daniel Sinclair lunged forward, pulling a thin, wicked-looking knife from his coat sleeve. "I told you," I yelled into the phone, desperation lending my voice unnatural volume. "She faked her death. She's alive. Check Monaco records for a recent high-value property acquisition under a Valerie Thorne." Sinclair tackled me just as the voice from the phone crackled to life, tinny and accented, utterly unfazed by the shouting or the looming threat of the knife. "Monaco?" the voice repeated dryly. "That's interesting, Mr. Peterson, because the last time someone mentioned Valerie Thorne in relation to a complex financial structuring, it triggered a global alert regarding a very specific, extremely volatile biological agent that was presumed destroyed in the late 90s. Are you certain you wish to proceed with this inquiry?" The world compressed to the sound of my frantic breathing, the muffled thud of Daniel Sinclair's weight pinning me to the cold marble floor, and the tinny, utterly chilling voice echoing from my phone speaker. Biological agent. That wasn't money laundering. That was state-level threat territory. Clara hadn't just faked her death for an insurance payout. She'd staged an elaborate disappearing act to move into a completely different, infinitely more dangerous league. Sinclair hissed, pressing the tip of his knife against my jugular, cutting through the thin skin just enough to draw a bead of blood. "Kill the call, Alex, or I cut deeper than that. What did you just tell him?" "I told him the truth," I gasped, leveraging the weight of the crimson ledger against his chest to create a fraction of space. Clara isn't just running a scam. She's weaponizing stolen assets. You're moving more than just money. You're moving something catastrophic. The two tactical operatives, momentarily stalled by the firefight in the elevator, were now converging on the lobby entrance, their heavy boots scraping against the tile floor. Time had run out. "Your friend on the phone is about to trigger an international incident on your behalf," Sinclair sneered, clearly believing the call was a desperate bluff. "And when the authorities arrive, they'll find you here in possession of stolen corporate property, having committed aggravated assault, and they'll find Clara, Valerie Thorne, nowhere near the premises. We win." But I hadn't called my Swiss contact for law enforcement. I called him for plausible deniability and advanced counter-surveillance. "You think I'm stupid enough to call the FBI, Daniel?" I spat, adrenaline lending me a clarity I hadn't possessed since before Clara disappeared. I called the one man who specializes in cleaning up messes the intelligence community doesn't want anyone to know exists. As the first operative reached the edge of the landing, weapon raised, the phone speaker suddenly emitted a high-pitched, agonizingly sharp electronic whine, a digital shriek designed to overload unshielded sensitive electronics. The tactical operatives staggered simultaneously, clutching their helmets. Their comm systems were screaming, effectively blinding and deafening them. The stunner/fob in Sinclair's hand suddenly sparked and died. Useless. EMP burst, I muttered, shoving the ledger toward Sinclair's face one last time. "You wanted the IP? Fine. Take it." With a desperate surge, I used the momentum of pushing the ledger away to twist my body, snapping my wrist upward and smashing my own phone, the line still open to the Swiss operative, against the base of the wall. The phone shattered, but not before I heard the operative on the other end confirm. "Confirmed initial alert vector. Containment protocols initiated. Evacuate premises immediately, Mr. Peterson." This wasn't the police. This was someone far more powerful neutralizing the threat on my behalf. Sinclair, enraged by the electronic chaos, lunged with the knife. I didn't try to dodge entirely. I met his momentum, driving my shoulder into his side just as the main lobby windows exploded inward, not from gunfire, but from a massive concussive wave. It wasn't a bomb. It was a targeted breach, a focused deployment of heavy-duty kinetic energy designed to shatter the glass structure without detonating the lobby itself. Through the gaping maw where the revolving doors had been, I saw the silhouette of a heavy-lift helicopter descending rapidly, its searchlights sweeping across the panicked, darkened lobby. The two compromised tactical operatives made a break for the shattered entrance, abandoning their incapacitated leader. Sinclair, realizing the game had shifted from corporate theft to federal-level intervention, didn't hesitate. He kicked me off, snatching up the dead comms fob, and scrambled toward the nearest patch of shadow near the reception desk. I scrambled after the ledger, which had skidded across the marble. I snatched it up just as a figure rappelled down from the helicopter, not in tactical gear, but in a nondescript, dark flight suit. He landed silently between me and Sinclair. "Mr. Peterson," the new arrival said, his voice calm, completely unaffected by the noise. "You're coming with us. We need a full debrief on Miss Thorne, the Valerie Thorne alias, and anything relating to the biological agent. Your safety is currently contingent on cooperation." Sinclair froze in the shadows. He knew this adversary was far worse than a corporate cleanup crew. This was the deep state responding to a code word attached to a decades-old threat. I looked at the repelling agent, then back at the shadows where Daniel Sinclair was trapped, and finally down at the ledger that had caused this entire, terrifying implosion. "Where is Clara?" I demanded, ignoring the agent pulling firmly on my arm. "Where is she taking Ether's code?" The agent didn't answer, guiding me toward the shimmering rope ladder dangling from the chopper. But just as my foot touched the first rung, a sharp final sound cut through the chaos, a single muffled gunshot from the direction of the reception desk. I whipped my head around. Daniel Sinclair was gone. In the spot where he stood moments ago, there was only a widening dark stain spreading slowly across the pristine marble floor. Then, a faint familiar sound reached me, carried on the wind rushing in from the shattered entrance. It wasn't a scream or a cry for help. It was the sound of a high-end private jet engine spooling up rapidly on the roof of the adjacent skyscraper, a pre-positioned escape route. Clara hadn't been with Sinclair. She was already airborne, the final pieces of my empire dissolving in her hands, leaving me stranded in the wreckage, now a person of interest in a potential international security crisis, with only a blood-soaked ledger and the chilling realization that the woman I loved was not just a fraudster, but a terrorist in waiting.